Here's a mind-bending question. Why is the richest, most powerful nation on Earth in debt? Not just a little debt, but a number so enormous, over $36 trillion in the US alone, that it's hard to even imagine. Meanwhile, the news is constantly screaming about government waste, budget battles, and economic doom. It makes zero sense. If you and I maxed out our credit cards like that, we'd be sleeping on the street. So, what's the secret? Why do practically all countries, from developing nations to economic titans, like Germany and Japan, operate perpetually in the red? Is it a sign of failure, or is it actually part of the grand plan? And if the US owes $36 trillion, who on earth is sitting on the other side of that balance sheet, waiting to collect? We're going to pull back the curtain on the single most misunderstood number in macroeconomics: national debt. It's not just a balance sheet entry. It's a powerful, often misunderstood, financial tool that shapes the fate of every single person on the planet. Get ready to have your view of money completely inverted. The first thing we need to do is define the term. Forget everything you know about personal loans. When a government says it's in debt, it's not the same as you owing money on a car or a house. We call this money sovereign debt or public debt. It is the total cumulative financial obligation owed by the central or federal government. This is a crucial distinction. It only includes the money borrowed by Washington, D.C., Berlin, or Tokyo. It does not include the debt of individual states, cities, or provinces. The mortgage on your house, the credit card bill in your wallet, your student loans, that's all private debt, and it doesn't count toward the national total. National debt is strictly the central government's tab. Think of the government as a giant corporation. Like any corporation, they have income primarily from taxes, and they have expenses: defense, roads, healthcare, pensions, etc. When their spending surpasses their tax income, they have a budget deficit. And just like a business, they have to cover that deficit somehow. The tool they use to cover it is borrowing. So, why not just skip the borrowing and print money? It sounds like the easiest way out, right? We have the printing press, just run it 24/7. Well, that is the quickest way to economic self-destruction. And we've seen it happen countless times. Imagine a small island economy where only 100 apples are available. If the government suddenly prints enough money for everyone to buy 10,000 apples, the demand for apples skyrockets, but the supply is stuck at 100. The price of an apple doesn't just go up, it explodes. This is hyperinflation. When the government prints currency recklessly, they flood the market, making the existing money supply almost worthless. The currency can literally become cheaper than the paper it's printed on. A tragic reality for places like Venezuela or the Weimar Republic in the 1920s. Debt, on the other hand, acts as a leash. Because borrowing comes with an interest rate and a repayment schedule, it forces a degree of discipline on the government. It's a mechanism that compels them to manage money more responsibly. Now, let's look at the 5 core reasons countries actually choose to embrace debt. It's not always a panic button. Often, it's a strategic choice. The first and most common reason is to fill the fiscal gap. As we mentioned, most governments run on a deficit. Taxes simply don't cover the immense cost of modern governance. If a government is $1 trillion short, they have 3 options, none of them popular. They can cut essential services, slowing down the economy, gutting healthcare, or infuriating voters. They can aggressively raise taxes, instantly making the public unhappy and potentially slowing economic growth. Or they can borrow. Borrowing is always the path of least political resistance. It allows them to maintain current services without immediately taxing the next generation into oblivion. Second, debt is an investment accelerator. Not all debt is created equal. Think of a college student taking out a loan. A loan to buy lottery tickets is bad debt. A loan to earn a valuable degree is good debt. It will increase their future earning potential. Governments operate the same way. If a nation needs a new high-speed rail network or massive investment in clean energy technology, but they don't have the cash on hand, they have 2 choices. Wait 10 years to save the money, or borrow it now and start building. Borrowing now means the economic benefits: jobs, increased trade, higher productivity start accruing immediately. The hope is that the debt-funded investment will boost the economy so much that the resulting increase in tax revenue will make paying off the original loan much easier. It's a strategic bet on future growth. The third reason is simply crisis management. When the unexpected happens, a war breaks out, a massive earthquake strikes, or, say, a global pandemic hits, the government cannot wait. They need massive amounts of cash right now to stabilize the system, provide relief, and save jobs. In 2020, the US federal government borrowed trillions of dollars in a matter of months to fund relief checks and business support. The sudden surge in debt wasn't a policy failure, it was a rapid, necessary response to prevent a total economic collapse. Debt is the financial equivalent of a life support machine during an emergency. Fourth, countries use debt to manage old debt. This is a trick perfected by governments everywhere, and it's called rollover. If a country issues a bond, which is essentially an IOU that matures in 2030, and when 2030 arrives, they can't afford to pay it off, what do? They issue a new bond to raise the cash needed to pay off the old bond. They are literally taking out a new loan to pay an existing one. This cycle continues, year after year. As long as the country is politically stable and has a healthy economy, investors are happy to participate because they get interest payments, and the government avoids the politically disastrous act of having to pay off the entire principal all at once. It's a perpetual refinance strategy. Finally, debt is a powerful monetary control mechanism. Sometimes, a government borrows money not because it needs the cash, but because its central bank needs to manage the flow of money. For example, if inflation is running too hot, the central bank might issue more government bonds. When investors buy these bonds, that money is effectively pulled out of the general economy, cooling down demand and helping to control rising prices. Conversely, if the economy is sluggish, they might buy back bonds, injecting cash into the system to stimulate growth. Debt instruments are thus a primary tool in the central bank's financial toolkit for steering the economy. Now for the big reveal. If the debt numbers are so colossal, trillions and trillions of dollars, who is actually on the other end of the line, lending the cash? Which single bank or magnate has that kind of wealth? The answer is nobody. Government debt is raised from three diverse, massive pools of capital: domestic lenders, foreign lenders, and the central bank. Let's start with the domestic lenders. This might be the most surprising category because it includes you. When a government wants to borrow money, it issues securities called treasury bonds or treasuries. When you buy a bond, you are literally lending money to your country. In return, the government promises to pay you back the full amount on a specific date, plus regular interest payments. But it's not just individuals. Domestic commercial banks like Bank of America or Deutsche Bank, giant pension funds managing retirement savings, mutual funds, and even other government agencies are all domestic lenders. For example, in the US, the Social Security Trust Fund is legally required to invest its surplus cash into US Treasury bonds. This money that one part of the government owes to another part is called intragovernmental debt, and it makes up a huge portion, sometimes over 20% of the total national debt. The second huge pool is foreign lenders. Just like a local investor, foreign citizens, foreign commercial banks, and most importantly, foreign governments buy bonds from stable nations like the US. Why? Because US treasuries are considered the safest asset in the world. If you are the Chinese or Japanese government with billions in foreign currency reserves, you don't want to keep that cash under a digital mattress. You want to park it somewhere safe, where it earns a steady return. US treasuries are the chosen parking lot. Japan and China consistently rank as some of the largest foreign holders of US debt. But they do this not out of charity, but because it's a reliable, profitable investment. However, not all countries are stable enough to attract these bond investors. For nations with shaky economies, Borrowing means they have to turn to specialized institutions. For large-scale infrastructure projects like dams, power grids, or railroads, they borrow from development organizations like the World Bank. These loans come with lower interest rates, but also with long-term, strict conditions designed to ensure the money is spent effectively. If a country is in true financial distress, broke, defaulting, and facing systemic collapse, it turns to the International Monetary Fund (IMF). The IMF provides emergency bailouts, but these loans come with even more punishing conditions. The country is often forced to slash government spending, raise taxes, and privatize state assets. These austerity measures are politically brutal and frequently lead to mass social unrest, but they are the price of last resort salvation. The third source is the central bank itself. You might think the central bank, like the Federal Reserve in the US, could just lend money to its own government. In the past, this was common practice, known as monetary financing, but it's now widely avoided because it is a direct route to hyperinflation. Instead, modern central banks typically buy government debt indirectly by purchasing bonds from the commercial banks that bought them first. This isn't usually done to fund the government, but rather to manage the money supply, control interest rates, and regulate the financial system, a concept known as quantitative easing. So, with this complex system in place, is national debt inherently a bad thing? Absolutely not. The real answer is that debt is a double-edged sword, and its virtue is entirely dependent on its management and its purpose. Debt is good when it is productive and sustainable. When borrowing leads to the construction of a new factory, the education of a highly skilled workforce, or the development of a game-changing technology, it is an investment in the nation's future earning potential. If the interest payments are low relative to the size of the economy, and the debt is used to fund things that will increase future tax revenue, it's a net positive. It's a tool for optimizing growth. Debt becomes bad when it is unproductive and uncontrollable. This is when a nation enters the debt trap. If a country is borrowing only to cover its day-to-day operating costs, or to pay the interest on its existing debt, the number spirals out of control. When the interest payments become so high that they start crowding out essential services like education, medical research, or national defense, the nation's productive future is being mortgaged to service the past. Furthermore, if investors start to doubt a country's ability to repay, if they lose confidence, its credit rating falls, and they demand higher and higher interest rates to compensate for the risk. This self-fulfilling prophecy eventually leads to a sovereign default, where the country throws up its hands and refuses to pay its debt obligations, plunging the nation into chaos and shutting it out of global financial markets. Sri Lanka's 2022 default is a painful, recent example of this exact mechanism. The key measure used to track this risk is the debt-to-GDP ratio. GDP, or gross domestic product, is the total value of all goods and services produced in a country. The ratio simply compares the total debt to the size of the total economy. Think of it like this: your personal debt load is only risky if you don't have enough income to service it. For a country, GDP is the closest proxy to national income. If a country has a 100% debt to GDP ratio, it means its total debt is equal to 1 year's worth of its entire economic output. There is no single magic number, but when this ratio starts to creep higher, say, over 100%, economists start to ring the alarm bells, as it signals that the debt burden may be too heavy to manage comfortably without major intervention. Finally, the question everyone asks: can a country be 100% debt-free? Technically, yes. A sovereign nation could pay off every single penny it owes. In reality, almost no country is debt-free, and more importantly, no large modern economy wants to be debt-free. The closest examples are microstates or principalities with unique revenue streams, like Macau, which has massive casino revenue, but Macau isn't a sovereign country. Why do major nations avoid being debt-free? The consequences of eliminating all national debt would be surprisingly damaging. To achieve zero debt, a government would have to either implement catastrophic, Sudden cuts to spending or institute tax hikes so severe they would immediately trigger a massive economic recession and social revolt. Furthermore, remember those government bonds? They are not just debt. They are a critical safe asset for the entire global financial system. Huge institutions, from insurance companies to retirement pension funds, rely on U.S. Treasury bonds as a guaranteed, low-risk way to safeguard their money. If a country suddenly eliminated all of its bonds, that safe investment option would vanish, forcing these massive pools of capital into riskier investments. This would increase volatility and jeopardize the retirement savings of millions of citizens. For a stable, powerful economy, a managed level of debt is not a burden. It is a necessary lubricant that keeps the gears of the financial world turning smoothly. So, the next time you see that gigantic number on the news, remember this: the figure itself isn't the problem. The question isn't whether a country has debt. They all do. The crucial, strategic question is how that debt is being used, whether it is sustainable, and who is holding the bill. It is a powerful tool of economic statecraft, capable of funding glorious futures or triggering devastating crises. It is a mirror reflecting a country's confidence and its commitments to its past, present, and future citizens. We've only scratched the surface of this complex topic. We haven't even talked about why some countries can sustain a 200% debt-to-GDP ratio while others collapse at 80%, or the intricate politics behind raising the US debt ceiling. And if you look at the real-world impact of debt, you find some of the most fascinating paradoxes in finance. Think of it this way: the ability of a country to attract massive amounts of debt is, in itself, a sign of its strength and stability. The US can borrow trillions at relatively low interest rates precisely because the entire world trusts it to pay the money back. If the US suddenly paid off all its debt, the global financial system would freak out, desperately searching for a new, equally safe place to store capital. The demand for that safety, that financial parking lot, is what underpins the continuous, massive lending. The system is designed to reward the most creditworthy borrowers with the most debt. It's a vicious cycle of trust. This concept also explains why countries like Japan can carry an astonishing debt-to-GDP ratio over 250%. By far the highest in the developed world, without collapsing. How do they do it? Because most of that debt is held domestically, by Japanese citizens and Japanese institutions. They are essentially borrowing from themselves. The risk of international investors losing confidence and triggering a flight of capital is significantly minimized when the debt holders are their own citizens, who are generally much more committed to the stability of their own nation. It's a domestic safety net that few other countries can replicate. The reality of national debt, then, the subtle interplay of confidence, growth, and political commitment. It's not a monster under the bed. It's a giant ledger reflecting every government decision ever made, every new highway, every wartime mobilization, every social program, every tax cut. All of it is eventually tallied in that national debt figure. Understanding this number is the first step toward understanding the true mechanics of global power. It's not just about what a country produces. It's about how much the world trusts in its future. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the true cost and function of national debt, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments, do you think your country should try to pay off all its debt? Or should it use it as a tool for growth? Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time for another mind-bending financial explainer.